All right, when it comes to framing, there's a lot to consider, and a lot of it's based on engineering, building science, and of course the dimensions of the sheets that you're going to put it down. So let's start out with the basics, and what we talk about is where the framing members go in a wall, where those studs are. And we've got three different ways that we frame up, and it's the distances between center of the studs. First off, let's go to the tape measure right here. If we look here, we've got this big box here, 16 inches on center. And if you notice on this Vantec product here, the zip system, they've come through and helped us out. They've given us these circles here to show us where those are. Now the next common one is 24 inches on center, and they put boxes on this. That way we can make sure and go through and we're nailing this stuff off. It's pretty easy that way, and it's easy to track with the sheet goods. Now there's another one here. If you look at your tape measure, you'll see a little diamond that's at 19 1/8. That's that third dimension of framing things out of what the stud spacing is. And so this is all meant so at an 8-foot sheet, we still end up at 96 inches. So these end up all equaling that. So when we put sheets of plywood or even drywall up, they all match up, so we span this and don't have to put any additional blocking in. Let me grab a 2x4 here and let me show you how we lay out for stud placement. That way we can build a wall. All right, so let's lay a bottom plate out and show you how this spacing goes. So we come in here, and this is where the first stud would go in. Then I'm going to come in here and mark 16 inches on center. Then I'm going to go over here to 32. But if I was going to build this, here's what I do is I actually take 3/4 of an inch off of this. I'll show you why. When I come in here, I'm going to mark that because we're marking center lines. And if I'm going to put another piece of lumber on top of this and I put it over the top of my center line, I completely miss it. So what I want to do is mark that on one side of it by 3/4 of an inch, because this is 1.5 inches, and that actually gives us the right spacing. So if I have this marked, I know this is my inside line, and when I lay the whole thing out, I just mark it. So that way when we're actually putting them together, you have a nice straight line and you can see it whether you're off kilter this way or not. When you put it on the center and you mark it, you'll never see it, and that's how you get off really easily with this. So take that 3/4 of an inch off, it'll line things up, and that way the panel spacing's easier and you have a straighter wall. All right, now let's talk about framed openings, and the header size really depends on what engineering says needs to be there, and that depends on the load and the span, of course, of what it is, so always follow those plans. Let me show you how this lays out. We've got our regular stud that goes up and down between the two plates. I'm going to lay this down and show you how we lay a header out. So we have our header is going to go in the middle here. I'm going to put this right here. This would be our jack stud. This is what would support the header. I'm going to move this down. Then we're going to have a 2x6 here. And then you've got to have some kind of spacing because we're 3.5 inches here. And of course, dimensional lumber is 1.5 inches, so we're 1/2 inch short. So many times you'll put a piece of plywood or OSB or just pre-order the right material for that header. And then you'll come in right here. And so that way we've got this sandwiched up in the right way. This jack stud on the inside is actually, or trimmer depending on where you live, this actually carries the load of the header. So everything from the top carries all the way down to the bottom, and that's a framed opening, and that's how you want to make sure structurally this holds up. All right, guys, there's a lot of little details to framing, and it depending on if it's inside, outside, whatever you're doing. But here's the thing, I'm going to put up a Facebook post, so head over to our Facebook page, Around the House Northwest. I'll put a detailed guide up there for your next framing project. All right, guys, today we have my 8 top tips for making that painting project look amazing. And it doesn't matter if you're inside or out, these tips should help you out and get that project knocked out and looking beautiful. Now, the first one on my list here today is making sure that prep is done right, and that starts out with just cleaning the project. If you're outside, soap and water on the outside of the house to make sure you got that cleaned up. And if you're inside in a bathroom, for instance, you want to make sure you got all that mold and mildew knocked down. Do something like this. Get a good mold cleaner. It'll take it down and prevent it from coming back in the future. And if you've got like smokers or things like that you're trying to cover up in a house, lots of scrubbing, soap and water, soft bristle brush will get that knocked out. If it's really bad, you might have to go in with TSP or something like that and just make sure you wear rubber gloves and get it cleaned up. And then make sure you rinse it down with some clean cloths, so that way you don't have anything sticking between that primer and the paint. And that's the things you want to make sure when you're dealing with that. Now, next up here is caulking. And this is a good one because it doesn't matter if you're working inside or out, you want to get the right caulk for the project. For instance, my favorite for outside projects is this Lexol because it works when it's wet. So if you just wash the place down, you can still use it. And it sticks to metal, stone like that. That's really hard for the latex-based caulks. And the cool thing is, not being silicone, it's elastomeric, which means you can paint over it. So that way it doesn't repel the paint, it'll stick on there. Now, if you're working inside or you're just doing some latex outside, this big stretch is really good. It's really the stretchiest caulking that you can get out there, which means it's going to expand and contract with our seasons. So when it's cold outside or hot like 110 in the summer, it's going to move around because that's what happens when caulking basically breaks down. It splits, you got to take it out and do it over again. Now, my next one is making sure that you've got a high quality paint. It doesn't matter what brand it is, but I think the most expensive mistake I've ever made painting is going with a cheap paint because it doesn't cover and last. And so if you go in and save 15 bucks a gallon for paint, you might need twice as much paint. You'll wish you bought the better stuff. Covers so much better and lasts so much longer. And when you're getting into colors, it makes a big difference because they've got a lot of additives in there to hold the paint color so it doesn't fade in the sunlight. All right, my next tip comes down to painting with a brush. Now, you want to make sure and use long strokes when you're painting. If you're sitting there and just doing a little bit at a time, that's not going to lay out smooth. And if you've got a long run, maybe around window trim or something like that, you're going to see all those little ridges. So long strokes, the longer you can do, the better. If you can actually go down the whole thing you're trying to trim out and you really get a long stroke, it's going to lay out so much nicer. And then when you come back with your roller, make sure that's wet so you can actually have the wet run all the way across that. It'll really hide all those brush strokes and it'll make the paint lay out really nicely. Now, when it comes to brushes, you get what you pay for. If you go out and buy these little dime store ones right here, guess what? They're throwaway every time and you're gonna see every paint mark with it. Some of my brushes I've had over 15 years, so this would have been the most costly one to buy, even though it was so inexpensive. Invest in some good brushes, it's gonna work so much better, and then if you take care of them, they'll last you for decades. When it comes to roller covers, there's a lot going on with them and you want to make sure you get the right one for the project. First off, get the nicer ones. They'll last a lot longer and it's going to give you a smoother job. Now, here's the thing. We've got two different size roller covers here and it comes down to the nap. If you've got a really rough surface, maybe it's brick, maybe it's rough sawn wood, you want to have something with a lot of nap on it because that's going to push into those cracks and crevices and give you a much more complete paint job. If you're inside doing smooth walls, one of these little 1/4-inch nap ones can work really good, maybe 3/8 tops depending on the texture. It'll give you a much smoother finish. It's going to look good when you're done. All right, here's a great tip as well, having the right tools for the project. And it's not just paintbrushes and rollers, making sure that you've got a great painter's knife right here. One of these 5-in-1 tools works great, and good a quality one. Don't abuse it. This edge I want to see really sharp right here. It works so good for cleaning out caulking, getting loose any kind of old paint debris that's on the wall. And if you've got a little bumps on it, you can go across that wall when it's drywall and knock those down to get a smoother finish, especially when you've had dirt and stuff in prior paint jobs. And I like this one here that I got from Paint Life Supply. This has a knife in it as well. So it's a great 5-in-1 tool. And you can even clean up your rollers when you're done. This is a great thing to have in your tool belt while you're painting. Now, another thing that can really save you some time is when you stop painting and take a break, maybe you have to run down and get some more paint supplies. Use one of these roller cover savers. This roller keeper right here, you can literally sit here with this thing, take the roller off, put it in, throw it in the fridge. It'll stay there for a couple months. This is a great tool for painting projects, especially for the DIYers when you're really trying to stop and start and get things done. No cleaning tools between coats. That'll save you a ton of time. And my last one today is using the right primer for the job. Now, I don't believe in the paint and primer all in one because it just doesn't work really well. If you've got areas where you've got new drywall or you've got new wood that you're trying, make sure you seal that. When in doubt, seal the project and then put paint over the top of it. That sealer's usually less money than the paint anyway, and it's going to save a ton of time and have a project that's going to last a ton longer. Now, I hope those tips help you with that painting project. Let's go painting.